Hello, my name is Sydney Scroble, and for my multimedia project, I chose to do the effects of drug abuse on rap culture. Rap and drugs have always been intertwined for as long as I can remember. Any song you listen to on the radio or just any popular song that we listen to nowadays has some kind of mention of drugs or a struggle with drugs or some kind of substance abuse, whether it's glorified or whether it's talking about how they are trying to recover or they're battling some kind of addiction, but it has always been a part of it since forever. Um, in my project, I included research done by the University of California, Berkeley, where they found a gradual increase over time of um, drug mentions in lyrics and the songs, just throughout the songs, whether it was in the title, whether it was in the lyrics, just any mention of drugs or substance abuse in the songs. So in the study, they took 38 popular songs from 1979 to 1984 and found that only 11% of the songs had any mention in the lyrics of drug abuse or drugs in general. Then by the mid 1980s, they found it increased and they found that 19% of the song lyrics had mention of drugs and drugs. um, and then as the study went on, by the early 90s, it increased again, but this time more substantially. They found that um, it increased to 45% um, by this time. And then after 1993, it was over half of the lyrics and songs that were the top charts in the Billboard were um, had any mention of drug use, substance abuse, and stuff like that. In my project, I mentioned how um, the University of California, Berkeley, the researchers there that did this study, accredited the um, mention of drugs and stuff like that to mainly three different things. So the first one being if the artist or rapper came from a neighborhood where drugs were very prevalent, whether they were selling it or it was around them 24/7, they just grew up around it and people they knew were dealing drugs or doing drugs or they themselves were doing them, whatever it may be. Whether so, just basically if they grew up around it, that had a very impactful, that had a large impact on if it was mentioned in their music or not. Another one was drug epidemics of the times. So, like in the 1980s, in the study, it mentions how there was the crack epidemic. So then songs around then started to mention more and more about drugs because crack was a bigger thing then, and um, more artists found it more popular to mention it in their songs. And then the third thing being the industry of drug dealing itself. um, I use an example in my project that the researchers at University of California stated that there was um, a label owner who was selling drugs, and basically that's how he made his money for the label, was laundering his money from the drugs through the label. So the artists that were signed there kind of I mean, I'm just assuming, but probably worked for them as well, selling drugs and stuff. Um, but yes. And then throughout my project, I also go on to discuss the other sources I use, talk about how um, drugs were mentioned in there are many rap songs because many rappers feel as though if their music is limited to what they are allowed to put out, then they're not speaking their truth. And they want to speak their truth, say their struggles, what they're dealing with, what they're going through, what drugs they're using. For them, music should be an outlet that's just very authentic and they can be authentically themselves and not limited to what they should be able to talk about. Um, I use an example from an interview on YouTube that I had found where several rappers, music producers, and stuff like that, and managers talk about how they battled with a certain. In this video, they talk about a specific drug, Xanax, and they talk about how they battled with their addiction to it, why it's so heavily mentioned in their songs and stuff, that they want their songs to be an outlet for them to talk about what they want to talk about. And for them, that's their drug addiction, their how they're struggling with it. And we don't really know what they go through because we're not in their position. So for them, like, drugs are kind of a way to cope with like what's going on in their lives, and their music is also a way to deal with that as well, by saying how they're struggling and stuff like that. And many artists these days have come out with songs like saying how they're struggling, and they're trying to get through their addiction. I use Macklemore as an example. He came out with a song where he that talks about drug addiction and struggles and different stuff like that. Um, but so that's basically what my project is about, is just how um, drugs have played such a heavy part in rap music these days, and it'll it'll continue to play a heavy part in it as well, just because um, you can't really limit what artists should be able to talk about or rap about and like sing about and stuff, because for them this is their outlet to be just as authentically themselves as they would like to be. And if that includes drugs, then it does. And it's not always a bad thing, but it's not always a good thing as well. If you're glorifying it, sometimes it's not a good thing, but also that's them being authentic to themselves. And then if they're struggling with it and they're doing that, that can be good too, because then it can show, hey, like, even though it's glorified, it's also not a great thing. So thank you, and that's my project, and I hope you enjoy.